So, okay, thanks. So first I will be discussing decolonizing as a concept, and also look into historicity of the concept, and provide some information about theories and updates in decolonizing English language education. And the core part of my talk will be the praxis, so which is a participatory action research that I and my colleague did. And so I will be basically sharing some preliminary observation from that project. And finally, so I will draw some implications with in relation to teacher education program and English language education in general. So I would like to, I'm sorry I didn't attend the whole conference. I had to teach, although I wanted to attend the whole conference. There were wonderful plenary keynote speakers and panel discussions, but I attended some keynotes and panel discussions. So, and I would just like to kind of highlight the key concepts discussed there. So Gary Barkujen, one of the keynote speakers, actually focused on the importance of identity in English language teaching, English language education, and English language education research in general. And Richard Smith talked about teacher research. So why do teachers need research, and what is the value of teacher research in terms of not only in terms of professional development. I'm sorry, so not only in terms of professional development, but also basically in terms of reforming English language education from bottom up, right? So basically, Richard Smith talks about, he does not really explicitly talk about decolonizing research, but these efforts could be considered as decolonizing efforts as well. So I will be giving some examples. And Alistair Pennycook was explicitly talking about decolonizing language ideologies. So he was moving us from, you know, just language as an isolated phenomenon to focusing more on language ideologies as our mentality, which is more problematic in English language education, right? And he was also talking about epistemologies, the knowledge that we have constructed in English language education, and the knowledge that represents people from different backgrounds. So, and I really enjoyed panel discussion. So the panel discussion basically was kind of highlighting the importance of ideologies and the colonization of mentality. So explicitly, there was a consensus among panelists that we have you know, reproduced, and we have been actually maybe in many ways romanticizing ideologies that do not really fit in our local context, or in many ways, as Dr. Awasthi was talking about, the importation of language ideologies, right? So, and eventually this whole discussion actually leading us to this, I think, sounds very simple, but very critical question that we need to really hammer out. So that is monolingual English language education or multilingual English language education. So I think my talk will be more around these issues, and I frame these kind of discussions from different perspectives as decolonizing English language education, right? So just to give you a brief genealogy of decoloniality. So there is, you know, there are two concepts that the scholars use. So one is decolonization and decoloniality. So as you know, decolonization is more often like getting independence from colony or colonizing or colonizers. But decoloniality is not just like getting independence, but it's about all forms of domination, right? So mostly, even if they, for example, sometimes we say that even if Nepal doesn't have like, colonial history in terms of like territorial administration, but we have imported different colonial ideologies, as it was discussed in panel discussions as well. So the coloniality basically is another side of the coin. So that is modernity. So when we started this whole discourse of modernity as progress, development, novelty, and we embrace all these assumptions in education and through English language teaching, for example, then learning English or English language becomes an indexicality of the modernity, right? Progress, development, novelty. So that basically leads to this kind of colonial differences. In other words, so it becomes like dominant form of our language education practices, for example. So that leads us to more like taking any forms of English related knowledge or English language education related knowledge as granted, and that leads to more like the form of dominations and stands as coloniality. So coloniality is often epistemological in nature. It's like coloniality of knowledge, right? So but that leads us to the question of whose knowledge is legitimate in English language education. For example, we have knowledge in curriculum, syllabus, in our pedagogy, and most importantly, research, right? So, but whose knowledge is represented in this curriculum, for example, pedagogy and research practices. Also, this morning, as Gary Barkujian was talking about the identity. So whose identities, linguistic, cultural, social, class, count in English language education? So after all, English language education is closely connected to this notion of geopolitics of knowledge that Walter Mignolo talks about. So basically, the global north, which is Western Euro-American values and knowledge, become kind of hegemonic, and we take them as a granted, basically in the global south, for example, Africa, Asia, and South America, and other parts of the world. So what I'm basically saying is decoloniality as a form of domination is epistemological in nature, and in a way we are not really doing English language education. We are basically doing the geopolitics of knowledge, right? So these geopolitics of knowledge basically travels through, as I said, curriculum, pedagogies, research, and maybe assessment, exams, and other things. So with this background, so I would just like to highlight, so where does it actually come from? So there are indigenous scholars basically focusing more on decoloniality. Work of Maori indigenous scholar Tuhi Y. Smith, and basically talks about this idea of decolonizing methodology, and she basically challenges the Western way of doing research and knowledge production, basically, and argues for promoting very indigenous and local knowledge that represents people who are part of geopolitics of knowledge or knowledge production. So, but at the same time, Tuhi Y. Smith reminds us that decolonization does not mean and has not meant a total rejection of all theory or research or Western knowledge. Rather, it is about centering our concerns and worldviews, and then coming to know and understand theory and research from our own perspectives and for our own purposes, right? So basically, she focuses on this idea of indigenous knowledge and questions the Western ways of knowing and Western knowledge epistemological system, and talks about how can we promote non-Western ways of knowing and collaborations and self-determination and autonomy. So basically, this decolonial tone basically argues for promoting non-Western ways of knowing and non-Western knowledge systems through collaboration, self-determination, and autonomy. So there are many things that we can actually learn from indigenous scholarship, but very few studies actually in English language education have looked into this area of research. So basically what happens is, if the whole literature on coloniality actually builds on the categories of human beings in terms of ways of being and ways of knowing. So we categorize people, human beings, in terms of their ways of being and their ways of knowing. So who is more powerful in terms of knowledge, right? Whose knowledge is legitimate, whose knowledge is represented in English language education. So basically what happened is, as Pennycook argues, English is strongly seen as the language of authority, economics, and knowledge, which means that we are ordering the other side of the coin. So that is, we are basically kind of promoting this binary distinction, a binary categorization, and contributing to otherness. So basically, how are the certain groups of people in English language education othered, right? So when we say English is the language of authority, economics, and knowledge, we are implicitly reproducing the discourse and ideology that the people who speak languages other than English are not really using the language of authority, economics, and knowledge. So in a way, we are like through our practices and through our ideologies and discourses in general English language education, we need to really question whether we are categorizing human beings in terms of the language and English language, basically. So basically, this is very preliminary, but based on my literature review, I can see that there are three major dimensions of decoloniality, and this is not really absolute framework, but this framework helps us understand how we can see English language education from the colonial perspective, right? So the first thing is ideology. So as it was discussed this morning as well. So basically, it's not a language that is a problem. Actually, English as a language may not be a big problem, but the ideology, the monolingual ideology, or the ideology that English means, learning English means, for example, to be modern or to be a developed person. Is something that is really problematic, right? As I said, that actually leads us to kind of the construction of othering people, for example. So this whole notion of monolingual ideology, so we have actually embraced a lot in English language education. For example, through traditional SLA theories that actually highlight on native speakerism, a standard language ideology. So as we have discussed this morning, English is now, so who is the native speaker of English, for example, right? The number of non-native speakers, so-called non-native speakers of English is actually way, more than the native speakers. So basically, but we still carry this ideology that native speaker teachers are better teachers. It doesn't matter whether they have, English language teaching qualifications, so they are more like native speakers. So they were born in, for example, the USA, UK, Australia, Canada, like that. So It's really very deep rooted ideology. So I think that's one of the major forms of coloniality, and the questioning that coloniality of ideology is actually performing decoloniality. Also, this idea of the separatist ideology of language. If we go back to this direct method, right? So where we were taught, I mean, we have read that the method that we should be using language when for example, when we are teaching English, we should be speaking English only, right? So it carries again this very monolingual ideologies, but in practice, so there are as we have discussed this morning in the panel discussion as well, it's not really possible to separate languages, but this is very ideological. The direct method that we have discussed in our teacher education program actually help us a lot, to carry these ideologies. But the direct method has its importance for different group of people, right? For example, training armies who need really very quick mastery over the languages, for example. And there is a strong resistance from teachers who are working in multilingual context, and this idea of translanguaging as the use of languages for pedagogical purposes simultaneously has been a kind of response to this kind of separatist language ideologies. And another important part of coloniality is deficit view of local languages, knowledge, and ways of knowing. I think I have to really highlight that when we see multilingual speakers as deficit, right? So as a second language learner of English, or the foreign language learners of English, so all of us are actually bilingual, and as it was discussed this morning in the panel discussion, I mean, we are all multilingual in South Asia subcontinent, and maybe all over the world. So people are bilingual, multilingual. So, but what we still do in our pedagogies, in our education, is we see these multilingual practices as deficit, and seeing language practices as deficit means seeing people who use those language practices as deficit, actually. So the deficit views of language is actually deficit views about the people and speakers of language. So that's one part of coloniality, and questioning these ideologies is a way to engage in decoloniality. So the next dimension of decoloniality is epistemology. So basically, it's a central part of decoloniality. So which basically refers to knowledge and the ways of knowing and ways of learning, and the knowledge system that we have. So how do we construct knowledge? For example, we construct knowledge through methods of teaching. I'm sorry, it should be research, right? So, but again, what kind of methods, what methods of teaching, and what is the nature of research? Are we representing the research, the knowledge of the people who are being researched, for example, and whose knowledge is represented in, for example, curriculum, textbooks? And the question basically, the South American scholars, Santos, and also South Asian scholars whose work is really powerful in applied linguistics, Suresh Kanagaraja, talks about this ideology of idea of epistemological diversity. So in English language education, are we really promoting one set of knowledge, or trying to diversify knowledge in our system, right? So again, the main question is, in our methods of teaching, in our research in English language education, textbooks, curriculum, and the set of knowledge that we are trying to push in English language education, do they actually represent the people, a diversity of knowledges, right? And another dimension of decoloniality is pedagogy. Basically, we often do this kind of, pedagogy, mostly prescriptivism. So we prescribe rules, we follow For example, in our training, we are taught to teach vocabulary this way, right? It's a finite set of rules, so more like prescriptivism, but the question is, does it work, right? So does our pedagogy support identities of teachers and students, epistemic subjects, or consumers of knowledge? So when I say epistemic subjects, it's basically related to the identity of learners or teachers as a knower of something. So they have something. They are not empty vessels, for example, right? They have some knowledge, right? They are not just like consumers of knowledge. Basically, does our pedagogy represent stories, contexts, and cultures of students and teachers? And this actually brings us to the post-Petar pedagogy of Kumarabada Velu, so who basically talks about how English language education pedagogies and methodologies are contextually sensitive, right? And representing basically identities, values, and knowledge of the local people, particularly in the periphery. So overarching, so I'm basically kind of trying to see decoloniality from or as a way to question the ideologies, epistemologies, and pedagogies that we have actually taken as granted. So here is a book by Santos, who basically talks about epistemologies of the South. It's a very wonderful book. And there is another book by Wathiango Gugi, so Decolonizing the Mind, the Politics of Language in African Literature. So I'm consciously using this literature because these talk about, all these scholars talk about the epistemologies of the South, right? So again, this is one way of doing or engaging with decoloniality, right? So in English language education, so there are some really interesting works done. Mario Lopez Gopar, so who works in Mexico, basically has published a book called Decolonizing Primary English Language Teaching. Although the book is about English language teaching primary at the primary level, but this book actually resonates, the context, all the context, including Nepal, where English is being taught as foreign language, a second language. So basically, his project is in short called KIR project. So it's a critical ethnographic action research project, and it's a university-based initiative. So as a university professor, he works with 10 student teachers. So student teachers here refers to the teachers who are going to be teachers in future and participating in practicum, or in other words, practice teaching, we call it in Nepal. So basically, he works with 10 teachers in 2 schools, which are linguistically and culturally diverse, and most students are from low socioeconomic status. So he basically draws on this. He argues that decolonizing English language education is an attempt to delink ourselves from the hegemonic authority of coloniality and to challenge the hegemonic discourses surrounding the English language. So decolonizing primary English language teaching, or English language education in general, means using the English language classroom as a space in which all the actors' identities, children and parents, pre-service, in-service teachers, teacher educators, and even administrators are renegotiated in order to value the different ways of being, speaking, and knowing of these actors, and to transgress the inferiority imposed by coloniality. So basically, he argues that decolonizing English language education means using the English language classroom as a space where all actors' identities are negotiated, renegotiated, and they are accepted as part of as part of language education or English language education, rather than considering them as inferiority imposed by coloniality. So Jim Cummins talks about decolonizing English language education as an approach to connect instruction to the lives and the aspirations of students, and it builds basically on the funds of knowledge. So the funds of knowledge basically refers to the knowledge that are not really part of formal education system, not really codified in textbook and curriculum, but they exist in the family, in the community, right, as an informal everyday knowledge system. So basically, he talks about decolonizing English language education as instruction that connects to the lives and aspiration of students. It builds on the funds of knowledge within communities and enables students to appreciate and do powerful things with their intellectual and multilingual talents. So as you see, that Jim Cummins basically focuses on funds of knowledge and multilingual identities. So he also argues that as Gary Berkman was highlighting, as if students do not really learn in the context where their identities are not really recognized, and they don't see that their identities are actually valued in the classroom spaces, not only classroom, but also in general school spaces, for example. So now, how does it work? So basically, in Mario's project in Mexico, there are basically 3 different stages of this project, decolonizing project. So in the first stage, he actually taught the course called Teaching English to Children, tech course for student teachers. As I said, the student teachers are teachers, the students who are going to be teachers in future. And he taught that course for 5 months. And he also observed some classes of these teachers, these student teachers. And he interviewed the 10 student teachers and analyzed their interviews and observed classes. But basically, they focused on the children's stories and experiences, and they started planning for practicum, in other words, practice teaching, right? So basically, they talk to students, they collect narratives of students, and they analyze those stories in order to get ready for the practice teaching. The third stage is conducting practicum in the 2 schools for 5 months. And as these 10 student teachers were doing their practicum in schools, the Mario was actually interviewing them, also having meetings and analyzing their experiences being in the schools. So now what happens is, for example, the basic component of the CARE project was identity text. So how did they analyze? How did they how did he, or let's say I would say, how did they actually engage themselves in this whole decolonizing process? So the basic thing was identity text, so which Jim Cummins described as the creative work of the students that reflect their positive identities. So basically, anything that students create, any forms of artifacts, any kind of artifacts, tangible material objects that students produce by investing their identities, linguistic identities, cultural identities, or any kind of racial, ethnic, gender identities. So basically, these 10 student teachers were actually asked to write their own personal stories by using multimodality, so which basically includes not only the text, but also photographs and videos. So as you see that this identity text that describes one of the student teachers uses both English and Spanish, and you can see the photos that they have used to describe themselves. So basically, this represents the identity of the student teacher, right? So now there is another book by by Donaldo Macedo, and this is an edited volume. And one of the keynote speakers of this conference, Alistair Pennycook, has also contributed one chapter in this book. And this is really, it was published in 2019. So basically, this book highlights on linguicism, this notion of linguicism, which basically refers to ideologies, structures, policies, practices, and activities that promote language-based discrimination across spaces. So basically, in English language education, we never question ourselves. Like sometimes maybe our ideologies and our practices, our activities may reinforce, for example, language-based discrimination. Sometimes some students may feel excluded, for example, right? Just because they speak in a different way, they have very different accents. Not a lot of issues, accent-based issues in Nepal, but I have seen in different parts of the world, the accent-based discrimination or sense of fear in school is actually very damaging, for example. So what I'm basically saying is one of the areas of decolonizing English language education, actually, as Macedo has talks about, we need to really look into, understand the misteaching of English, actually. So as I think Dr. Awasthi was talking about this myths of English language education this morning, right, in panel discussion. So we don't really, language teaching in general is not really a problem. Language is not a problem, but the misteaching of language and myths of language that contributes to linguicism, language-based discrimination, is something that is really problematic, and we really need to actually question and address that issue. So this book also highlights some pedagogical models, for example, critical pedagogy as one of the ways that actually help us engage in decolonizing project. Also translanguaging. So translanguaging, there are a number of studies now on translanguaging, but basically it's the simultaneous use of languages that children and teachers and other language actors or actors of education bring in the classroom or in the school. And also indigenous and funds of knowledge. So we have, like, each community has, each family has a different set of knowledge and values, and children are actually exposed to those knowledge in their early life, right? So, but when they are in school, for example, I think English language education is the field that does not really value in many ways, right? And we haven't done much to see how indigenous knowledge and funds of knowledge could be part of our pedagogical practices, curriculum, and also basically in the teaching learning in general. So what I'm basically saying is decolonizing language education is English language education also is also kind of an effort to address linguicism that we have actually constructed in many ways, or we need to really address that issue. So another, you can call it theory or you can call it pedagogy. So Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire in 1970s, who talks about dialogic methodology in teaching, for example, where students are exposed to problems, to the community problems, social problems, and they collaborate and co-create the knowledge and power to address those issues. So basically, he is more concerned with teaching not only word, but also world, right? So teaching world through words, right? So teaching social issues in language education or education in general. But Bonnie Norton and Kellyn Tuohy in 2014 so came up with really interesting idea of this pluralization of critical pedagogies, right? So there is no one pedagogy as such as critical pedagogy. So there are multiple forms of critical pedagogies, for example, right? So, for example, if you talk to poets, right, artists, so they have very different ways of addressing social issues. If you talk to hip hop singers, right, they have these youth hip hop singers have very different ways of, addressing social issues, for example. So they basically argue that it's really important to provide critical instructions with a focus on social justice and diversities of knowledge and ways of knowing. We don't have really one set of knowing. There are multiple forms of knowing. So these, they should be actually recognized. That is what Norton and Tuohy talks about. And I think I don't have to really explain a lot. I think Richard Smith I think he in his keynote, he was talking about teacher research and decentering ELT. So basically now in terms of doing research, there are really interesting move towards engaging practitioner, engaging teachers in doing research. They don't have to be just like consumer of knowledge, right? They can be they can research their own practice and they can produce knowledge that produce knowledge for other teachers. It's not just like university professors or researchers who are producing knowledge and the teachers would be consuming those knowledge, but teachers can create knowledge from their own practices. So this is more like teachers research initiative. It's not new effort, but in the global south now, from in India, in Nepal as well. So there are wonderful initiatives. I think some of you are part of that exploratory excellence research projects that Richard Smith and British Council is actually leading. And there is a group of teachers called Champion Teachers in Chile and Mexico and other parts of the world. So who are actually doing a wonderful job in building knowledge from their own practices. And recently there is a move on like this whole idea of decentering ELT. So basically focusing on Teachers Association as one of the key actors of English language education. And we basically the whole idea of decentering ELT that Richard Smith and Dario, Harry, and other colleagues are working on is we need to really diversify the spaces and the knowledge of English language teaching, right? So now let's move on to what I have, and I and my colleague basically in Kathmandu University. I was invited to lead a module last semester, but I was really busy, and I talked to one of the professors in Kathmandu University who was supposed to lead the course, and we agreed that we really do something new, and we call it Decolonizing English Language Education. Although the module that was given to us was Issues in English Language Education, that is official name for MPhil students in Kathmandu University. So these are all, but fortunately, all students were in-service teachers, and it's really wonderful. And so basically, the prescribed contents include teaching methods, for example, communicative language teaching, task-based language teaching, multilingualism, technology-enhanced teaching. So, but these are all already, bulleted. So we call it like bulleted syllabus. So everything was listed out in the syllabus. But how did we do? Basically, was the first step we did in this effort. So I'm not saying that this is perfect model of decolonizing. Actually, there is no any prescriptivism in decolonizing ELT, but this is how we were trying to do something new. So the first step was we engaged students in writing their own syllabus. We looked at the syllabus, but because the syllabus was about issue, we actually started questioning what is an issue for you in your own context? What does an issue mean? And building on their own personal experiences as a teacher, the students actually started negotiating syllabus, which is called negotiated syllabus, right? So rather than considering syllabus as like finite set of knowledge, so we actually started negotiating. And we collected multiple issues, for example, lack of students' participation, autonomy in appropriate textbook contents, a gap between community and schools, students are passive in the classroom, lack of creativity and interaction, gap between policy. For example, one of the students actually brought this issue. There is a policy, EMI claimed as, you know, the better policy, but in practice, there is nothing like, you know, EMI. So these are some of the issues. And then again, we discuss why are these topics issues for you? Why do you think that these are issues? And we basically engaged ourselves in understanding how these issues are, how these topics are issues for the teachers who were participating in the course. And mostly the understanding of these topics as an issue was based on personal stories and personal experiences of these teachers. And they were engaged in elaborating on this in each issue. So the writing syllabus, this is just these are two examples. So there were 6 students. So it's a small group. So we asked them now, not one student is creating the whole syllabus, but the 6 students are co-creating one syllabus first, right? And each student will be responsible for one unit of the syllabus, and that is what he or she was going to explore later. So for example, one is textbook. So one student brought this issue. He's based on his own experience. The textbook is problem in Nepal's ELT, for example, because and then we discussed extensively, and we asked students to specify the various dimensions of that issue. For example, representation of knowledge in the textbook. This is what students specified. Cultural relevance of textbook contents, Nepal's textbook development policy, process and power relations in the textbook, teacher and students' role in the textbook. So these are the contents that actually need to be discussed to understand this issue more. And then another student actually brought this issue of ELT method, teaching methods, and learner agency, because she felt that the students were not actually actively participating in her class. And as we discussed, she found that there is a power relation, actually, the issue of power relations, because teachers are always considered as teachers. And she has to go through the prescribed methods and prescribed textbooks, and she has to finish all these courses in time, for example. And also textbooks-based teaching and focus on the given activities, and students kind of became more like dependent and not really being independent in terms of learning. And there were other topics as well. These the students actually identified. One is critical pedagogy, another is oral history as a method of teaching. When you say oral history, it's like students go to community and talk to community elders, and bring that history back in the classroom and use them as a resource. And also one student was talking about critical EMI policy, and another student was talking about local knowledge in English language teaching. And then step 2 was basically now we met each week, and in each week we have our own agenda. So basically the agenda of fine-tuning the issue and finding the ways to explore and address those issues. So the next step was diversifying knowledge and collaboration. So basically, students were, we identified different resources and reference materials for each discussion or each class. and each unit that a student has created. So in other words, so basically in traditional syllabus making, so those readings and reference materials are books or journal articles, right? But in this in our project, so we didn't really encourage. I mean, we just didn't encourage to have like those resources, just like articles, books, journal articles. No, they can bring any other reference materials, for example, a multimodality and more like personal narratives. So the first, because journal articles are not really accessible, there are so many constraints. Second, because we thought that journal articles, books, and book chapters are very dominant forms of knowledge, and we actually encourage the students to bring classroom videos. They can take classroom videos of their own class by using their mobile phone, and also they can collect the students' narratives, sometimes case studies, and also their own experiences and photos, anecdotes, and all those things. So see, all these forms of, all these materials are actually forms of knowledge, not just journal book chapters that are published in high-ranked journal, for example. And in each class session, the students were they presented what they have done in their class, and they have very critical dialogue with friends in class, and each member comments and draws meaning from the resources. Step 3 was more like planning for exploration. So they design participatory action research and try out the plan, and they share their plan for and also preliminary experiences. Basically, they discuss with their students, and their students' responses are actually discussed in class. And they revise the plan and collaborate with the students. So for example, one project was critical pedagogy project. So one student was doing work on dramatization, how students can write drama and perform drama on girls trafficking. So, but again, the language was not really constrained. So they can use Tamang, they can use Nepali, and they can use English as well. So it was multilingual and multimodal. And oral history, and the next project was local knowledge project and the textbook creation. So basically, students were engaged in creating text, the unit of text for using them in the classroom, right? And also funds of knowledge and learner autonomy. So the students collected how local community members have different sets of knowledge about, for example, cooking, cultural practices, and even like farming, all those things. And EMI policies also, one student actually talked to students. So how do they experience EMI in practice? And there are really critical ideological discussions with the students. So I should be quick now because I think I'm taking a long time. So and the next stage was reflection. So when they try out their plan and they share their initial reflection on initial work, but responses from students are very key here for the reflection in the class. Basically, I think there is a background noise coming in. So, but there are multiple responses from the students, and these students actually bring in the class, and we discuss how to address these responses from the students. And also, I'm sorry, Janakji, there is something. There is a noise.
It is from Deepak.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Thanks. So, and also there were some issues. For example, students reported that they have language problems. So how do they collect the stories? How do they use stories that is told in Tamang, for example, and Nepali, right? So because they were learning English, for example, in this case, right? So, and also the COVID-19. So there was an issue in the middle of this project. And also the students were not really getting opportunity to collaborate each other because of COVID. So we discussed all these issues in our class. And also each each group member had to question and provide feedback to their colleagues, right? And basically, we discussed like what worked out well and what did not. And at the end, so we have like self-reflection and again revise the plan and again go back to classroom and try out the new plans. So the step 5 was more like exploration and sharing. So now what happens is like students actually go out to the communities and the teachers facilitate, and the students document ways of knowing, for example, cultural practices, life histories of local people, even socio-political issues and personal narratives. And this whole project embraces multimodality and multilinguality. If students cannot use language, or they can use very minimum language, but they can take photographs, they can draw pictures and bring that in the classroom. And for example, like they use mobile phones and took photos and videos. These are all forms of actually knowledge, not just like something that has to be in writing, right? For example, like in critical pedagogy project, as I have mentioned before, so they visited like Tamang communities and interviewed people about girls trafficking. Also the oral history community elderlies were interviewed, and then their stories were recorded and they translate it into English using dictionaries. And it's really challenging cognitive tasks, and it's been very, very meaningful, but more multilingually and building on their own resources, linguistic resources, and the resources, other resources they have. And also textbook creation. So students visit actually local marriage ceremonies and they document, they take videos and they actually, it's called like, convert that videos into text. So there are so many cognitive investment and also interaction between students. They use Tamang, they use Nepali, they use English, and finally they produce something in 3 different languages, right? Yeah, I think I need to really skip it, but basically exploration is students really go out of the classroom and try to bring whatever they see outside into the classroom. Step 6 was implementation. When I say implementation, it is about how the product of they had produced videos. I'm sorry, I don't have time, so I can't show you the videos. They produced videos, they produced textbooks, not really full textbook, but some chapters for the textbook to use, for example, for teaching reading and critical thinking and critical pedagogy, for example. So, and now these students are the students in our class, they actually use these products to teach English multilingually and in different ways in the classroom. So it basically helps students to create or to see themselves as the knower. So they have something like all these products are actually outcomes of their own efforts, actually, with the help of course, teachers, but they were actually doing it collaboratively, investing their multiple languages, actually talking to the people, and translating, transcribing, and with the help of teachers, of course, performing in the classroom, particularly the performance of the drama on girls trafficking was really wonderful, because they were not really performing in English only, they were performing in different languages depending on the character who speaks. For example, if the character is someone from the community that speaks Tamang, for example, that speaks Nepali, not English. So it was more like critical pedagogy, cultural awareness, and social awareness. And they were also doing multilingual storytelling and storytelling. So yeah, this is how language teaching happened. So finally, the final stage was a reflection and the plan for dissemination. And I think these students are still working on documenting what they have done, but these are they have written a written reflection, and this is how they have written. So for example, the first is the red one basically talks about how he engaged his students in the co-creation of the textbook. For him, he basically started this project because when he asked his students whether they liked the text, and that there was a text about Mary's as a social institution, and then the text was all about American marriage system, right, or the values, and they didn't really understand that. So then this student actually started this project, and the students went out to the community, talked to senior citizens, observed marriage practices. And it's more like multimodal because they documented in different forms, not only in writing, but they use their mobile phones to took videos and later converted into another mode of expression, for example. So the students were working on this issue, and I was making good progress on my progress. So this is how the teacher is reflecting. And the green one, so the teacher says the time flew, 6-month journey was full of new experiences where we heard something unheard and did something which was undone. And some days passed with enthusiasm. I have gone through different theories and reading which paved my project and understanding as Macedo 2019 views. And language educators must be exposed to as much theory as necessary so that their practice reflects as a deeper understanding in language acquisition. That is L1 and L2. Finally, the discussion during the session, experience sharing, working on the project were all new experience. Most importantly, I'm convinced that if we do something and write on it, our fingertips stop nowhere. And I feel I had almost done on my project, but when the title itself was changed, I feel the journey will go longer. In conclusion, the whole project guided me to become an autonomous learner as a scholar and change mindset as a teacher, where I feel self-reflection is the mirror which enforces us to do something better. So this is how the teachers are reflecting. So to conclude, decolonizing English language education is an unfinished project, right? It's not really finished project, and we should keep engaging students, teachers, parents, and communities in the co-creation of knowledge. And it involves critical understanding about language ideologies and their impact on the lives of the people who are a part of English language education. So that's why I always advocate that, it's really, we really need to move away from this linguist centricism. So we are focusing much on language, right? And we need to really move from language centricism to more people-centric discussions. So it's really important to understand how language teaching and education impacts, let's say English language education impacts the life of people who are benefited or who are not, whether learning is taking place equally. So how does it impact the lives of people from different backgrounds? So that's why it's really important for us to have kind of understanding that language teaching and education is about people, and English language education is about people, not just about language. And focusing on local context and lived realities and stories of the students and teachers is really important. So multilingual and translanguaging practices should be integral component of English language education, as I have highlighted. Throughout the project, the students were using multimodality and multilingualism as part of, as resources, not as a problem, and to achieve what they were doing. So identity receives the central stage here. So basically, this idea of multi-epistemic. So basically, every individual, every student has multiple forms of knowledge, and they have very multiple ways of knowing and learning, and they bring multiple identities. So this would be nurtured. They are not a problem actually, right? So, and also doing language education, not just language teaching. So we always have this kind of like narrow conception of language education as language teaching only. So it should be the focus of teacher education program. So when I say language education, it's all about people, right? So how we do understand people through English language education. So who are empowered, who are disempowered, who are benefited, who are not, whose identities are recognized, whose identities are not recognized. education is broader than just language teaching. So that's why in my title, I use English language education as a broader framework to understand how we make sense of people in students, teachers, and whoever or multiple actors who are part of ELE as people with their own values, knowledge, and identities. So finally, I conclude with Kumara Badavelu's decolonial options in English teaching. Can the subaltern act? So basically, I think this article is available. It's a free access. So basically, he argues that the only meaningful option open to the subaltern community is the decolonial option. The option demands actions, right? So there is no any prescriptivism or prescriptions for decolonial projects. So as I have said before, but without action, without any form of action, the discourse is reduced to banality, and which is again, a form of, again, reproduction of coloniality. So I think I conclude here. I'm sorry I took really long time. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, so I'm more than happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phyak. If you have question, we do not have much time, but we can raise just one question, okay? If you have anyone. Okay, there might be lots of questions. Actually, we need time to discuss these questions as well. Certainly, I'm sure there are questions, but anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Prem Phyak. Actually, I want to read one line from the slide that always strikes me. Language teaching and education is about people, not just about language. Focus on local context and lived realities and stories of students and teachers. Wow, this is the very wonderful idea that if we practically apply or if we practically use in our instructional practices in education, that will be very wonderful. And there are many things or ideas to reflect here. But if I speak on this reflection, again, it will take 1 or more hour, since we are very tired from early 8:30 to now it's 6, almost 7. Thank you so much, Dr. Prem Phyak, sir. You accepted our invitation. He's so busy that, okay, so busy that he doesn't have much time, but he heartily accepted our invitation and grant an hour for we people. That's so much. Okay, we are really grateful to you, Dr. Phyak. Thank you so much, and we are expecting more support in the days ahead, and your support is inevitable, not only in the context of Nepal, but in the context of world. Thank you so much, Dr. Phyak. Namaste.
Yeah, thank you, Janakji, and thank you everyone for listening to me. I think it was, maybe I was more theoretical, but I just wanted to balance both theory and practice. But okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it's really wonderful to be connected again, and yeah, I'm always happy to stay in touch with you. So thank you everyone, and thank you Far Western University family, entire family. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.